Today we're going to talk about the big thing that's quietly been going on in the background. And you're not going to believe this. I mean, you're going to hear me say this, and you're going to wait for me to say, and here's the catch. But there isn't one. Dragonflight Season 3, the current season right now, is on track to be the most played season of World of Warcraft in history, specifically in Mythic Plus. And that's insane. There is no trick here though, there is no catch. There is about 28 million completed runs in 106 days. That's almost a full million more than Season 2 did in 198 days. Almost double as long. And yeah, that means people are almost playing twice as much Mythic Plus. I don't know, is World of Warcraft somehow twice as good as it was last season? I mean, straight up, this all feels rather outrageous, doesn't it? Because otherwise, World of Warcraft seems quiet. I mean, ask most content creators, and we'd kind of say that by all means, this is the big lull until the next patch. Now, obviously, the 10.2.6 stuff has happened, but that's got no bearing on these results that we're talking about today. Today, we're going to explore this data and build a hypothesis. Are these numbers what they really seem? And if so, what secret ingredient did Blizzard slip in to cause this? Right after I pay the bills with today's sponsor. Squarespace.com/Bellular Gaming. Last time I talked about how Biosites, Fluid Engine, and Blueprint are features that just make actually building your online presence easier than ever. But that's not the end, because they also help you run your business. Now, they've got fantastic email newsletter tools, and they can handle your digital and physical e-commerce. So as an example, let's say you're doing some merch, some physical products. Well, if you're doing merch, you could maybe set up with their partner Printful, build your designs, bring them over into Squarespace, and then you're done. If you're a bit bigger, well, Squarespace can actually integrate with whatever fulfillment company you use. So when you get an order in Squarespace, it will automatically be fulfilled, saving you loads of time. Squarespace memberships let you do free and paid members. They have a new course tool that lets you turn your knowledge into income, and the user experience for all of this is just awesome. I mean, hell, they do appointments and invoicing to help you run your business. So if you're physical, digital, maybe you're an agency, maybe you're a hairdresser even in your local town, whatever it is, they've got the tools to help you stay on top of your business. For 2024, they're even working on Squarespace payments, and I always like to see whenever a company is shipping lots of updates. That's what they've done through 2023, and they're continuing to do. So you can build your website for free today, and when you're ready, you can send it live with code Bellular Gaming for 10% off. Let's get into things. This spreadsheet is collecting Mythic Plus data directly from Raider.io, and it's been lovingly put together and maintained by Nightstalker314, a longtime member of our community who, does incredible stuff. And remember, this is from Raider.io, but Raider.io's information is from the Blizzard Armory API. So these numbers are from Blizzard servers, basically. With that said, let's go and do some key takeaways. The biggest thing to look at here is the big number, the overall number of runs, because that acts as a marker of just how much M+ is being played. Now, unfortunately, we don't have data from before patch 7.2 and nothing from 9.0, which is Shadowlands Season 1. But we can see one thing very, very clearly. Mythic Plus participation in the later patches is substantially higher in Dragonflight, and it's only getting even higher. Generally, Mythic Plus has been growing pretty rapidly since Battle for Azeroth. In spite of us missing some 9.0 data, you do see that Shadowlands almost matches all of BFA for runs. Now, that data is not the most reliable. Nightstalker's loosely estimating BFA and Shadowlands' real totals to be around 70 million and 82 million respectively, but for an expansion with so many fewer players, Shadowlands, which many of us would call WoW's absolute low point, that's pretty damn impressive. Something clearly was working, but it's working much better right now. On top of that, would you be surprised if I said that this was the easiest season of Mythic Plus yet? Well, you probably shouldn't be, because when you look at the ratio of keys that have been timed, right, you can see it's 90%. 90% of keys are timed, up from 80% in Season 1, 85% in Season 2, and an average of 70% in Battle for Azeroth. So you might be wondering then, do higher completion rates equal more players? Well, certainly they do seem to correlate. The next thing that impacts things is affixes. It's amazing what we can see here. Bursting and bolstering weeks, they are genuine key killers. I mean, almost every key in Everbloom is timed until bolstering in this graph and bursting in this graph are added, so that's the impact that affixes can have. Another cool thing to learn is what keys are actually being done. Looking quickly here, we can see where most of the community's efforts are. Now, you would expect most keys are on the easy side, right? Like most keys that are done. Well, at the start of the season, that's definitely the case. This is what it looks like for week 1. You can see that some people are already blasting plus 17s, but over half of all keys are plus 2s. Week 7, though, when people have got tier sets and more gear, looks a little bit more like this. The biggest keys being done are 18 and 20 by far, with about 55% of keys being plus 17 or above. So it turns out most of this Mythic Plus gameplay is genuinely being done at the Keystone Hero level of play rather than the Keystone Master or below level of play, which is quite impressive. Now, of course, we don't have the complete data because Season 3 hasn't finished yet, but this trend will only grow as the season goes on. And what this essentially means is that Mythic Plus isn't just enticing in people at lower skill levels, it means that people are actually engaging with it at the highest level that rewards gear. Now, those are the most important things to glean from all of this, but trust us, when relevant, we're going to dig back in and get more. For now, though, let's just consider the main thing. Why are people playing so damn much? Is Mythic Plus really that good? Well, the easiest thing we can do is to ask what's different about the game, and I think when we do that, one thing comes to mind, and that's gearing. In Dragonflight, we are now the beneficiaries of 7 years of iterating on how we get gear from M+. Now that begins an eternity ago when we were all young and happy with Legion. In Legion, it was raw drops with more loot from more successful keys. I mean, do you remember trying to get like a 3-chest run of a dungeon? It was just you pulling that slot machine lever and hoping for the best, with of course the consolation prize being a handful of artifact power. Now, many people's main Legion memory then advanced to just doing a single Mythic plus 15 a week in order to upgrade the single loot box that you would get. As we move from Legion to BFA, nothing massive changed. I mean, artifact power was suddenly called Azerite power, but Mythic Plus wasn't exactly all that farmable unless you were content with just pulling the lever for your 40% chance of gear. The extra chest system didn't make it across, but you still did get one extra piece for timing the dungeon. Now, Shadowlands brought back, of course, item upgrades and Valor points, and that meant that farming M+ suddenly was way more palatable, but then, of course, the Great Vault came in, and that gave people a lot of an incentive. And if we're to assume that gear incentive is what drives people to play, then that does go some way to explain the boost in Shadowlands Mythic Plus versus Battle for Azeroth. The game rewarded people for playing more, so they played more. Now, on top of gear rewards, official M+ scores were added in patch 9.1, meaning that people could track their progress without having to use the Raider.io add-on and Raider.io score. Now, this also had the side effect of considering Tyrannical and Fortified as different dungeons for the sake of scoring. And that actually meant that getting Keystone Master required more gameplay. Now, of course, we're in Dragonflight. Season 1 brought in item upgrades from Shadowlands, but Season 2 is what truly powered that all up with crests and flight stones. So now, if you want gear, you can basically just do Mythic Plus all day long, fill up in currency, and just pump whatever gear all the way up with all that currency. Now sure, you're still relying on luck for actual gear drops or the Great Vault, but the overall feeling is that with enough runs, you're going to get there. So that's potential culprit number 1. If we're to build our hypothesis as we go, then here's the first part of the hypothesis. Gearing is easier, and there's more of a fixed progression path than used to be there, therefore people are playing more. Beyond that, what else is different? Well, there are some things that are self-explanatory, like Dragonflight altering the dungeon pool on a per-season basis, instead of it being the same for a year or two. Remember how shit that was? Seasonal affixes were great, but they were a very minor change compared to, like, doing an entirely new dungeon. On top of that, there's ease of access. This is a big thing. In Dragonflight, getting to dungeons has never been easier. We've got the portal Rumble room that was added this season, which is beyond a gift. It has literally never been easier to get a group together and bomb straight into a dungeon within a few minutes. And that is a far cry from the days of Legion, when you had to fly all around the Broken Isles, or maybe teleport from one island to the other island in Battle for Azeroth, or take those dreaded flight paths in Shadowlands. What a change. And for all of those minutes saved, well, people can do more Mythic Plus dungeons. But there's one more element that's really a bunch of things combined, and I think it might be the most important thing here. So here's the deal. In our other breakdowns, when we've been digging into the data for raids, we've seen a pretty notable increase in the clear rates throughout Dragonflight. Basically, yes, less guilds are raiding than at many points in the past. However, the retention is really strong. And what we're essentially seeing is that of the guilds who start a raid, far more of them actually complete the raid, right? Now, of course, the prevailing answer there is that we've got higher quality raids, we've got a better game overall, and, most notably, that clearing normal and heroic is a hell of a lot easier than it has been in recent years. The percentage of guilds that kill the first boss and make it to kill the final boss is slightly higher in Dragonflight than it even was in Legion. Then, we took a look at the Dragonflight changes to Mythic Plus, and I think we're basically seeing a similar thing. Now, I don't know if you've hopped into Mythic Plus dungeons lately, but it turns out this season is really easy, right? So, as a test, Matt decided that he would see how far he could go on an entirely new spec, on a fresh 70, and this is what it looked like for him. After a short hour of doing Dream Surge stuff to get 415 gear on his Mistweaver Monk, he picked up a +2 key from Lindormi and just went. The +2 became a +5, that became a +8, and then a +11. And the only reason he didn't do the +11 right away is because nobody would sign up, because it was for Morazon's Rise, which is the hardest dungeon in the pool. But later, after dropping the key level and then re-rolling it, he was able to do an 11 Dark Heart and a 10 Atal'Dazar with 0 issues whatsoever. Now, these are low-level dungeons compared to the people doing 18s and 20s, but in terms of what the average player is going to do fairly quickly, this is a very low-stress game mode right now. And I say that because Matt's average item level started at about 415 to 420. He was doing dungeons that were dropping 440 to 450 gear as a healer in a new spec to him, and he found the tanks were being tickled, if they took any damage at all. Their DPS were melting mobs in seconds, so he could basically just chill and kick things with his monk. And yeah, sometimes he would need to heal, but even when he did, he was kind of doing it inefficiently, right? Like throwing in Chi-Ji, Life Cocoon, Shenluin's Gift, right? Things like that. He had the tools for, whoopsies, but basically, even though he was ostensibly undergeared for the dungeon, it was a total cakewalk. Then for the affixes. Well, Blizzard have defanged them again and again throughout Dragonflight, to the point where they're minor inconveniences, except for stuff like bolstering. All it takes is basically one clued-in player to handle things like Incorporeal or Afflicted, and with all 3 affixes only appearing at +14 and beyond, loads of players don't really see them that much, but even without seeing them, they still get a solid enough sense of progression through both gear and key levels. And then we've got the change in scaling with Season 3. That has made +15s, which previously were the equivalent of a heroic raid, feel like a walk in the park. And of course, your Great Vault gets hero level gear from doing +8, so if you're patient, you don't even need to push. You can do really low keys and still get a lot of gear. So basically, if a player's measure of success is getting stuff done on their character, I think players are finding way more success in Mythic Plus this season, and that is being reflected in the numbers, especially when you compare the percentage of keys done timed per week, and how that is only getting higher and higher and higher and higher, where we're sitting now in and around the 90s versus like 75% for BFA. Now, on top of that, the talent trees and tier have led to, I think, almost Legion levels of power creep. Most specs have got crazy options for utility, defense, or burst damage, and some even have got all 3. Rolling into a Mythic Plus with the likes of, say, Mistweaver's Leg Sweep and Ring of Peace, a Mage's Mass Barrier and Blast Wave, Vengeance's Sigil of Silence, or Blood's Bomb Limb or Mass Grip, and players have basically just got buttons to deal with problems forever. You can just smash buttons and win. So, that's part 3 of our hypothesis. Mythic Plus is easier, so more people are enjoying it. And that may to some of you seem counterintuitive. You might think, oh, people will enjoy it if it's a real challenge and they get real satisfaction out of it. And I mean, yeah, I'm with you in that, but one of the things that will lead to enjoyment is people succeeding. Not just in the dungeon, but the overall gameplay experience of progressing their character through Mythic Plus, and I think that's the bit that's happening. So to recap our thoughts so far, Part 1, progression is better. We got crests, we got upgrades, the Great Vault is relatively generous versus difficulty, and that means a few easy Mythic Pluses a week will eventually net you full heroic raid gear. Doing harder stuff at a faster pace can even get you Mythic gear. Basically, effort is rewarded for the most part. Part 2 then, of our hypothesis. It is far easier to just put together a group and go quickly, in most part because of the easy to access portals and key management. Part 3 then, with classes being stronger, affixes being defanged, and dungeon scaling being less aggressive, Mythic Plus is literally just an easier, more relaxing experience. So what we're seeing, I think, is 7 years of iteration finally paying off, and they're not done yet. Just last week, they announced a host of excellent changes coming in Season 4. I went into them in this video, but let's actually go and give a little bit of context to those changes via data. Okay, looking at these graphs, we can see that outside of the first week or so, the vast majority of Mythic Plus is done well above the plus 10 range. In Season 3, the majority of keys are actually done around the plus 16 range. So, looking at the new Season 4 changes then, they're shuffling difficulty around with these timerless, affixless Mythic Zeros in Season 4 that are going to be about as hard as plus 10s today and will offer about the same amount of gear as a plus 10 would. The Mythic Plus system then starts from that baseline, meaning that plus 2 to plus 10 in the new system will be the same as plus 12 to plus 20 in the current system, while heroic dungeons are moving up to fill the spot that today Mythic 0 would take up. And of course the big difference there is that means it'll be queuable. Overall then, what's happening is Heroic and Mythic 0 are getting harder but more rewarding. Mythic Plus will have fewer key levels. So let's process this through our 3-point hypothesis of gear, ease of access, and difficulty to see if this sort of thing could be successful. On the point of gear, this basically moves where players start in the gearing curve higher before the plus part of Mythic Plus starts. Given that Mythic Zeros drop more gear than Mythic Pluses, but of course are on a lockout, this actually means that people's initial gearing will be faster. Remember, when you do a Mythic Plus dungeon, you only get that one bit of gear at the end, and the chance is like, what, 40%? Whereas in a Mythic Zero, you actually do get way more gear. It's not been talked about much, but that's actually a major thing with the new system. On the topic of ease of access, well, with Heroic dropping OK starter gear and still being queuable, I mean, there you go. One button for dungeons, that will matter more. That's a big increase. Then, of course, if you want to do a Mythic Zero, there'll be no affix or timer, but it will be a good bit harder than it used to be, which I think actually is positive because it will make for a less stressful on-ramp to the real Mythic Plus. That'll be good for people to build up their confidence in harder content without having to worry about a timer or affixes. Okay, on the topic of difficulty, bear with me here, psychology is kind of crazy. A plus 10 sounds easier than a plus 20, even if it's just as hard. It's a smaller number, it feels less intimidating. I actually think that could have an impact. On top of that, the lack of an affix and a timer on the now harder Mythic Zero is technically an easier version of what a plus 10 would be today. So on both fronts, it actually feels a bit easier. Okay, Season 4, in spite of all these things, probably won't have massive numbers because it doesn't have new content to bring people back. But these changes will be rolling into War Within, and I think that means that Mythic Plus will post its best ever numbers with the launch of the War Within. Even with that though, there are still some unsolved issues, so let's quickly run through what Blizzard could fix from now to then. Okay, let's talk about remaining issues and give Blizzard a little bit of a, I suppose, to-do list of things they should perhaps consider. Right, we talked about how much damage bolstering and bursting do to key time rates. I mean, the way the winds are blowing, it really does seem that an affix that you can mostly ignore is, per the community and player data, the best kind of affix. I mean, I asked on Twitter, and it did seem that most people just want to launch affixes entirely into the bin. That said, especially amongst higher-end players, the desire for seasonal affixes is still there from what I can tell. These would change up dungeons a bit, and Blizzard ended up just killing them as a feature because when they're doing a new dungeon pool every season, they just felt they didn't need the seasonal affixes. That being said, it does seem that the seasonal affixes were more of a success in terms of player sentiment than other sorts of affixes, so maybe there's something Blizzard should consider there. The other thing then is the consistent complaints that exist about the cap on crests, things like, flight stones and stuff. It just seems that Blizzard could maybe do some more iteration there, maybe give people a way to transfer crests and flight stones between their alts, and of course, that could be wrapped into the warbands feature of the expansion. The next thing then is numbers. I mean, especially Rise of Morozon, that's the one that's the most brutal. It does seem to have some lower numbers. Maybe Blizzard should think more about the difficulty spikes that can exist in the game. But I suppose that's inherently a case-by-case thing based on the dungeons. Ultimately, I think the point here is there's really not much in the way of problems left to iron out. So there it is. As the young people say, Mythic Plus is bussin'. For real, on God, and apparently there is no cap. Don't know what any of that means, but apparently it's good. Look, Blizzard's numbers are all going up, and hey, in the business, what do people like? They like what numbers go up. I think ultimately here, we're just seeing that after 7 years of fiddling about with the recipe, this part of WoW's secret sauce is finally pretty damn tasty, and people keep on doing it. That being said, I definitely think we could have arrived at this position a little bit earlier. I mean, I think a lot of the benefits that we've seen have came with Blizzard's mindset shift that Dragonflight really represented from a gameplay design sort of standpoint. Who knows, maybe we could have been at this positive area back in the days of Battle for Azeroth, had it not been for a little bit of stubbornness. But anyway, let's not nitpick the past. I think the main point is this stuff's looking pretty good, and I think it's a good, healthy sign for the war within. All right, are you one of these people? Do you own one or maybe more of the 3.5 million characters that exist on the Season 3 leaderboard? If so, let me know what this season's been like for you. That said, though, that's it for me. I'll see you next time.